2 years after the start of Israel's assault on Gaza, can Donald Trump's so-called peace plan bring an end to the bloodshed, or will it merely provide cover for the ongoing genocide?
If Hamas really wants the Palestinian state, then I think this is the first step towards getting that. And if you don't take the first step, you can't finish the drill.
But human rights experts warn that imposing a solution on Palestinians is destined to fail.
It is a plan that is effectively dictating the terms of surrender to the Palestinian people. It begins with what it says would be the de-radicalization of the victims of the genocide, but not of the perpetrators.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. Back in October 2023, few could have imagined the situation that Palestinians living in Gaza now find themselves in. Their immeasurable suffering has been compounded by global inability or unwillingness to stop what a UN Commission of Inquiry recently concluded is a genocide. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has unveiled a 20-point plan. It calls for Gaza to be a, quote, de-radicalized terror-free zone, which will be redeveloped for the benefit of its people. It says Gaza will be governed under a transitional, technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee under the supervision of a board of peace to be headed and chaired by President Trump, with other members including former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. No one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. Hamas and other factions agreed to not have any role in the governance of Gaza. There will be a process of demilitarization under the supervision of independent monitors. The United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force, ISF, to immediately deploy in Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the Israel Defense Forces will withdraw. Now, while President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu insist their so-called peace plan is a realistic attempt to end the bloodshed, there has been fierce opposition to it among human rights experts. One of them is Craig Mokhiber, an international human rights lawyer. He resigned as director of the New York office for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in late October 2023. In his resignation letter, he stated clearly a textbook case of genocide was underway in Gaza. He joins us now. Craig Mokhiber, you described the Trump-Netanyahu Gaza plan as, quote, anachronistic colonial arrogance, accusing both leaders of, quote, dictating the terms of surrender to the Palestinian people. You say there is no accountability for genocide, there's no end to apartheid, no self-determination. If that is the case, why then have so many political leaders around the world welcomed this plan so enthusiastically?
Well, I think if you look carefully at what was actually developed here, both in process and in substance, has nothing to do with resolving the situation in Palestine and Israel. This is not even an agreement. It was something that was developed by Donald Trump, the Israelis, a hodgepodge of sleazy characters like Jared Kushner and Tony Blair, for their own reasons, involved very much in this. And yes, consulted with a few Arab governments, those that work most closely with the United States and with the Israelis. But the Palestinians were not at all involved in this plan. And this is exactly, the kind of move that provides comfort for those who don't want to do what they are obliged to do to stop the genocide, to stop the occupation, but gives them something to hide behind. We are working with the Americans on a peace plan. Well, it's not a peace plan. It is a plan that is effectively dictating the terms of surrender to the Palestinian people. You can see it from the opening of Trump's 20, previously 21, and now 20 points. It begins with, in the middle of a genocide, Gita, it begins with what it says would be the de-radicalization of the victims of the genocide, but not of the perpetrators of the genocide. It talks about the release of Israeli captives, all of them, but only some Palestinian captives held in torture centers and dungeons all across Israel. It allows space for the continuation of this murderous GHF so-called aid trap. And, worst of all, rather than moving the Palestinians toward their liberation, it would impose an additional layer of colonial governance by a body established by the US in consultation with its European and Arab co-collaborators that would put everything that happens in Gaza in the control effectively of Donald Trump and his allies, and that includes economic development.
What do you make of the timing of this plan? Because there was a certain amount of momentum just a few weeks ago at the United Nations General Assembly. Many were hoping that there would be a resolution called a Uniting for Peace resolution that could have mandated a protection force to be deployed in Gaza to protect civilians there. Does this so-called peace plan now undermine any such movement?
Well, it's certainly an effort to undermine that movement. There have been effectively three tracks in international discussions around the UN. The first is that accountability and freedom track. This is the drumbeat that began with the genocide case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, with the indictment of Israel's leaders, including Netanyahu, for crimes against humanity, with findings of apartheid and genocide made by UN human rights mechanisms, leading international human rights organizations, Israeli human rights organizations, Palestinian human rights organizations. And that was beginning to have teeth and to find traction, which was most represented by a resolution by the General Assembly last September, that basically codified everything that was in the International Court of Justice advisory opinion and said to Israel, you have 1 year until the middle of September of 2025 to comply with all of the orders of the court and all of the demands of the General Assembly, or face further measures. And I think that those who have been coming up with these alternative plans, that is the Trump plan or a French-Saudi plan that aims at stabilization and returning Gaza to the cruel status quo ante that existed before October of 2023, all of those plans were very much developed alongside, by the way, random recognitions of a Palestinian state, other distraction methods to get away from what has been happening for almost 2 years now, which is an increasing level of accountability for a regime, the Israeli regime, that up until that point had enjoyed absolute impunity. But there is action on that accountability front. There is actually a proposal being circulated that would provide for accountability. For example, it includes things like a call for sanctions, a military embargo, the reactivation of the anti-apartheid mechanisms to deal with Israeli apartheid, the denial of Israel's UN General Assembly credentials, and the mandating of an international protection force for Palestine based on the consent of Palestine. It is a tough climb. It is an uphill climb. It's being led by Colombia, but with the support of other co-sponsors. And, the hope is that as this conversation has moved out into the light, it will change the political calculus of delegations in New York at the UN and force them to say yes or no to protection for a people facing extermination.
The UN Secretary General actually welcomed Trump's plan. He said it would be a way to end the quote-unquote conflict. He has refused to date to use the word genocide. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. This is precisely the way he and other senior leaders in the organization have been behaving since the genocide spiked in October of 2023. And this is an abdication of their duties. I mean, this is trepidation, is what it's a fear-based approach to international diplomacy. The Secretary General refuses to talk about genocide. He refuses to talk about root causes like colonization, like political Zionism, like inequalities, all of the things that have created the horrors through which the Palestinian people are forced to live. He will not mention. Instead, he sticks to basic talking points that say, ceasefire, humanitarian aid, release the hostages, which he repeats over and over again, avoiding any reference to genocide, avoiding mostly any references to accountability for the perpetrators. And now, as we see, expressing a willingness to go along with this absolutely atrocious declaration of the Trump administration.
You were the first senior UN official to call it a genocide. In your resignation letter to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, you wrote in late October 2023, just 3 weeks after the attacks of the 7th of October, quote, "Once again, we are seeing a genocide unfolding before our eyes, and the organization that we serve appears powerless to stop it." You said it was a textbook case of genocide, And you also accuse the US, the UK, and much of Europe of being wholly complicit.
What I stated in my letter in October of 2023 was already obvious at that moment, because you have this tradition of absolute impunity on the part of the Israeli regime that had created in them a level of confidence that allowed them to declare their genocidal intent out loud over and over again before the glare of cameras. I mean, that should have been a warning to everybody at that moment. They shouldn't have had to wait even another month. And yet they did. And so it was with, the genocide case in the International Court of Justice, the indictments of Israel's leaders in the International Criminal Court. Still, you saw UN leaders in particular being too afraid to actually speak the truth, as is required by their mandate. And it's important, Gita, because, the genocide is not a matter of editorial opinion. It is a crime that is defined with great specificity in the Genocide Convention of the United Nations, which describes the kind of intent that's required and the kind of acts that are required. All of those were manifest already in October of 2023. And there was no acknowledgement from the senior UN leadership then, or when the ICJ started its case, or when the indictments came down from the ICC, or with the declarations of all of these other organizations about genocide and apartheid in Palestine. And all of that is simply a fear-based reaction, fear of upsetting the Americans and the Brits and the Germans in the first instance, fear of being harassed and persecuted by Israel proxy groups in the West, all looking for a safe place to hide. And that's why when terrible plans like those articulated by Trump come about, they see an opportunity to have something else to hide behind. Remember, for 30 years, they hid behind Oslo and the so-called two-state solution, while the Palestinians were being persecuted and murdered and displaced, and settlement activity was increasing, and the prisons of Israel were filling up with innocent Palestinians. Palestine was being erased, and Israel was being increasingly more and more normalized for 3 decades of Oslo. These plans are an effort to get back to that comfortable place of Oslo, where those countries that are complicit or otherwise not meeting their international obligations with regard to Palestine have a safe place to hide. And that's what's so dangerous about this plan. That's what's so dangerous about the French-Saudi plan. It could be Oslo 2.0, which would mean the end of Palestine.
What does all this do to the credibility of the so-called international community and to the standing of institutions like the United Nations and the International Court of Justice?
Well, absolutely. I have said that it is not only Israel that is on trial at this moment in history. It is international law, international institutions, international diplomacy. All of those systems that have been built up since the Second World War are hanging by a thread. This is, on the one hand, this is our Holocaust moment, which is a moral test for everyone, and we will see who responded appropriately and who did not. But it is also our League of Nations moment, because international institutions and an international legal order that cannot even enforce the most basic rules of humanity don't commit genocide. If they are unable to respond effectively, they will wither and die. There's no question in my mind that this is the final test for the post-war international legal system.
What is the alternative, though, to the two-state solution, which you say has functioned as a smokescreen for the dispossession of Palestinians and war crimes, including genocide?
So there is an alternative, to answer your question. It's an alternative which is based upon international law, international human rights, and the concept of equality. A dispensation from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, where everyone is equal, has equal human rights, and that is, democratic, and that is secular, and that includes the right for Palestinians to return to their homes, that includes the compensation for all that's been taken from them, that includes the development of a society based on human rights, not on supremacist political ideologies like Zionism.
And that would include, presumably, putting an end to the complete impunity that Israel has. You've accused the West of building, quote, a wall of impunity around Israel since its inception. Do you sense that this wall is now cracking under the momentum that is building towards boycott and sanctions?
I do, and cracking for the first time since the State of Israel was founded by the West in 1948. It's interesting, that year, 1948, was the year that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. It was the year that the Genocide Convention was adopted, but it was also the year of the Nakba in Palestine and the capturing of Palestine by Israeli settlers, and the year that apartheid began in South Africa. So you could see that what the international community was doing at that moment, it was adopting a set of rules for everyone, but carving out exceptions for a couple of settler colonies that they said would be excluded. And, for all of these decades since then, Israel has enjoyed absolute impunity, which describes a lot of their behavior now. I mean, if you are Israel, a state that was founded by annihilating the indigenous people, that has been maintained through violence, that has been expanded through violence, and you have never been stopped, that explains why you have the confidence to do transnational terror attacks in Lebanon with booby-trapped pagers, or to assassinate leaders all around the region, or to carry out acts of aggression against Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Iran and Yemen and beyond. All of these things come out of a sense of impunity that you will not be held accountable. But this past year and a half or so, we have seen an increasing drumbeat of accountability because of the court cases, because of the movements around the world of students, because of people's tribunals and people's encampments in university and the People's Flotilla sailing to try to break the siege on Gaza. That is precisely why Israel's allies and co-collaborators, principally in the West, have moved to try to create alternatives to shift the focus away from Palestinian freedom and into new models of Palestinian subjugation. It won't work.
Craig Mokhiber, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Gita.
Meanwhile, President Trump's supporters see the plan as a viable way of stopping the violence and a way to security for Israelis and Palestinians. Joining us now to discuss Trump's plan for Gaza is former Republican Congressman Lynn Westmoreland. He previously served on the Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman Westmoreland, you were one of Israel's strongest supporters in the US Congress. Today, how do you view the US-Israel relationship and the new plan that was presented by Trump and Netanyahu at the White House?
Well, I think, that the president has worked real hard. I was really, I guess, surprised that Netanyahu went along with some of this stuff, because to me it was not such a good deal for Israel. Although they want those hostages back, I don't blame them. I think the world wants to see the hostages come back, but they're giving up quite a bit in this.
Many believe that Israel, in fact, wasn't asked to give up anything. They say it's a phony peace plan that is designed to fail and to give cover for the continuation of what an increasing number of organizations have said is a genocide.
Well, I don't see it as I really don't see it as a genocide. If you want to talk about a genocide, then you
Congressman,
can go to
Amnesty
Nigeria and look.
International and every other international organization has called it a genocide. In fact, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry released its report saying this is a genocide. But beyond that, how do you achieve peace if Palestinians aren't allowed to govern themselves?
I think they're being given an opportunity here to get to that position to where they can govern themselves, and I just don't view it as a genocide.
Israel has been accused by every credible international body, including human rights organizations inside Israel, of committing a genocide.
Yeah, I mean, and that may be their view. I just don't share that view. I really don't. I don't think it is, and I think that what the president has done with this peace plan, and what these world leaders have done with this peace plan, is put the genesis on the Hamas. I mean, do you really want peace?
But how do you achieve peace if you do not recognize a Palestinian state? If at the end of this process there isn't a sovereign Palestinian state that has a military that is allowed to defend itself?
Well, I mean, I think you achieve peace by, in this plan, in the fact that the Israelis withdraw, the IDF withdraws from Gaza. There is a plan to rebuild that strip. I think that is the way that, if Hamas really wants the Palestinian state, then I think this is the first step towards getting that. And if you don't take the first step, you can't finish the drill.
Why should the United States and Israel decide the future of Gaza? This plan foresees a board of peace, quote unquote, which will be chaired by Donald Trump. This isn't 1825. This is 2025. Do you believe that Palestinians need colonial governors?
I think what these leaders and President Trump and Netanyahu are trying to do is to put together international kind of coalition, peace board, whatever you want. And some of those people want Palestine to be recognized as an independent state. So I think that putting these people together will help the Palestinians come about and how to form a government that can be accepted in the region.
But Congressman, you know as well as I do that no matter what this plan says, Netanyahu has made quite clear that he will not relinquish control of Gaza.
The devil's in the details. I don't know that we really understand all the details that have gone into coming up with this peace plan, or that would be part of the process going forward. And a lot of the Muslim countries have said, yes, this is a good plan. Let's go forward to it. These are the very neighbors that are in that region, and these aren't so-called, friends of the Israelis.
The reality, Congressman, is that there are many young Americans who are now turning away from Israel. Israel is losing support among young American voters, whether you like it or not. This is the reality. Is Israel today more of a liability than an asset for the United States?
Well, the young voters voted overwhelmingly for President Trump. And, you have a few at some of these college campuses that are protesting about Palestine.
It isn't a few protesters at campuses, Congressman. A recent poll from the New York Times shows that 34% of American voters side with Israel, while 35% support Palestinians and 31% remain unsure. This is a stunning reversal from just 2 years ago.
Well, I think if you look at the news reporting that we get here in this country, it's a lot of one-sided reporting too, as far as what's going on in the Gaza Strip.
The polls show that a majority of American voters now oppose sending economic and military aid to Israel. Nearly 7 in 10 voters under the age of 30 say they oppose additional economic and military aid. 6 out of 10 Americans now say Israel must end its military campaign. And 40% of US voters say Israel is intentionally killing civilians in Gaza.
And that is what this plan is intended to do, is to stop the war in Gaza, is to bring about a ceasefire, some type of permanent peace.
Congressman,
I don't
the
know
United States has
I don't know
vetoed 6 resolutions in the UN Security Council that called for a ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu, it has been widely reported, has sabotaged every possible peace agreement that was reached with Hamas that would have resulted in the release of all hostages. This is the reality, no matter what the spin
I'm not familiar with.
is.
Well, it may be the reality, but here he is with other world leaders putting a plan for peace on the table with immediate withdrawal of his troops from Gaza.
The plan does not call for the immediate withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. It says that the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, between the International Stabilization Force, and the guarantors, and the United States. This is not an immediate withdrawal by any stretch.
Well, my understanding was it was an immediate withdrawal from what I've read. But as I said, the devil's in the details. I have not read every word on every page of what this peace plan is. I would hope that Hamas would agree to this skeleton of a peace deal and start the process of maybe some continued talks, but at least bring about the fighting in the Gaza Strip and make it to where the United States, Israel, others can get the humanitarian aid into Gaza that it so desperately needs.
Former Republican Congressman Lynn Westmoreland, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Once again, Palestinians are left with a so-called peace plan that denies them their fundamental rights. A plan imposed by foreign powers to undermine the growing global momentum at the United Nations General Assembly to recognize the state of Palestine and stop any concrete measures to end the genocide through a multinational force, through sanctions, and through boycotts. A plan that requires Palestinians to disarm and forego their inherent right to self-defense, in addition to their right to shape their own future. In short, this is a colonial plan packaged as a peace plan. It will not lead to a just and lasting peace as long as Palestinians remain subjugated and Israel's occupation and impunity continue to be protected. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team. Thanks for watching.